But the first universal law is that everything is mind. Talking to your body does not make any difference if your body is not going to be listening, and the ultimate healing frequency of 528. So this is 528. You're listening to the Transform Your Life from the Inside Out podcast. This episode is titled Conversations with a Sorcerer. And I've already done a couple of episodes on this topic, talking to Don Javier, a sorcerer. And this topic of this episode, and maybe one more, will be on physical healing. In this conversation, Don Javier was talking to someone who came to visit, and they were physically healing. And he turned the conversation to energetic healing. Now, I don't know where you are in your life right now, but everyone at some point in their life is going to need healing of some sort physically. And many of us go to the doctor or we do physical things to heal. And he talked about that. But in this episode, what we want to talk about also is some of that, but also energetic healing. And as well, we want to talk about healing with frequency and the ultimate healing frequency of 528. So if you need healing now, make sure you listen. If you know someone who needs healing, make sure you send this episode to them. And if not, this will still apply to you because you will find things in here that you can use in your life. Keep listening. Conversations with a Sorcerer, and we're talking about healing. This conversation happened back in 2021. I've introduced Don Javier to a lot of my students over the years, people that are inside the transformational coaching program, that for whatever reasons, they become connected with him. Many of them start on his waiting list, and his waiting list is literally right now, I think 2 or 3 years long, even though he charges very, very little. But there was a female that came to visit one of my students, and we were having dinner at his house, and she was talking about physical healing. And his comment to her, and I'll jump back and forth between notes from Don Javier, some simple notes that I took, and then perhaps interjecting or further explaining something. The reason I will further explain in certain places is because he will jump around a lot in the conversation. And as I've mentioned before, a conversation can be 3, 4, or 5 hours with him. And I can't take that 3, 4, or 5 hours and put it into a podcast episode. So what we'll do is I will actually pull snippets of comments that he made about healing and share them with you, and then comment on some of those things. So talking about healing at dinner that night, and by the way, this is how I've lived my life for 28 years now. I mean, this is basically, air quote, normal table conversation in my house and around my family. He said to her, his first comment was, because she was wanting to heal physically, he said it's not just about the physical healing, and it's more about the power that we wield, meaning the divine power that we have, the energy that we are. I want to go back to 2020. When I had the heart failure and stroke in 2020, I think it was around Christmas time, he was over at my house. The conversation in this episode was over at his house, but he was over at my house and he was talking to me. And I mentioned this in the podcast before, because I was in the process of healing, having had a stroke and heart failure in 2020. And he said to me, as a metaphor, what kind of car do you drive? Now, of course, he knows back then, or he knew what kind of car I drove. And I had a Porsche. And he said to me, he goes, so if your Porsche broke down, would you take it to any old mechanic, or would you take it back to an authorized dealer that has factory trained technicians, basically taking it back to the manufacturer, so to speak? And I said, well, my car, there are a lot of things like an oil change has to be done from under the car. And most mechanics can't do that in a lot of different ways. I was speculating maybe they wouldn't be able to. But I always took my Porsche, and I've got a Porsche now. I always take them to the dealer because I know that I've got factory trained and very skilled people working on my car, and they understand my car. And he said the same thing about healing. If we need healing, do you go to the local mechanic or do you go to the manufacturer? Now, when he says manufacturer, what he means is pretty much the topic of this episode, which is divine mind. But I want to concretize that in this episode. And the way that we want to look at it here is energetic healing. I don't mean faith healing. And even though faith can be energy, he pretty much backs up everything he says with quantum physics and science. And I'm going to talk a little bit in this episode, not about the particulars and the specifics of healing, but in terms of science, but I want to talk in terms of universal mind, divine mind, energy, and sound, and using frequency to heal. And my point of mentioning every bit of that is we're trained, especially in the West, when someone is sick, what do? I don't anymore. And by the way, if you need to see a healthcare professional, then do it, please. I'm not telling you not to do that. What I've said before is that many of us will see a healthcare professional and then give them all of our power, meaning we will tell them to poke a pill in me and do this and do that and all these kind of things, when the most powerful healer in the universe is already in you. That is consciousness. That is divine mind. That is energy. So the whole point of what I opened with is, instead of just going to the doctor and saying, hey, doc, what's wrong with me? And then many times, which we'll talk about in this episode and maybe a second episode to this, is many times a doctor will give people a diagnosis, and that actually, air quote, makes them sicker because it puts them in a lot of fear, and they start spiraling. They start, going into a tailspin because of a diagnosis from an external source, when all healing is internal. So when we need healing, whether it's a broken arm, and research has demonstrated this at Harvard University and other major universities, the National Institute of Health, the Mayo Clinic, Harvard University, Columbia, etc., medical schools, that we can heal using the power of the mind. Where do you think power of the mind comes from? Everything comes from source. Mind is source. Source is quantum field. Source is energy. A lot of people call source God. Doesn't matter. Whatever you want to call it, God, quantum field, it doesn't matter. It's the essence of that energy. So in that conversation, he asked this person, so what are you doing naturally to heal yourself? Now, she used to be a competitive athlete. And so what she started talking about, well, let me back up here. Being a competitive athlete is great. And, many of us like to watch sports, and the Olympics just happened and etc. But I remembered him talking to someone else who worked with him, not at the level that I have as an apprentice for all these years, but somebody who came into his orbit. And this person was all about, and they're very, very big still online. They own a very, very successful health and wellness company. And this person was talking about flipping tires. And I mean these big tractor tires. And this guy said he hurt himself. And Don Javier was talking to this guy and to this person, saying that many people stretch beyond their capacity in that moment and they hurt themselves. Because what we're trying to do, like flipping tires, is we're trying to keep up with other people. We're using an external motivation and gauging ourselves and measuring ourselves against that external motivation. And he said every body, meaning every physical body, is different. And his quote was, many people try to measure themselves against others when they have a different type of body. And then he asked her, which is where I started a couple of minutes ago, he said, what are you doing in regards to the best natural way to heal. And she said something that I'd mentioned to her, I guess, a year prior. And I've taught this to other students, but let me explain it further here. She said, well, I'm talking to my body. And he asked her, is your body listening? And then he went on to say, talking to your body does not make any difference if your body is not going to be listening to what you're saying to your body. And then he went on to say, it's a two-way conversation. Does your body listen and then reciprocate based upon what you're talking to your body about? Now, as I've said in this episode and many, many, many episodes, he always talks from the spiritual perspective, being a shaman, a sorcerer, a babalao, and the wall. But in all of our conversations, he always ties it back into, and it can be mind-boggling, he always ties it back into physics and mathematics. And in this conversation, he was talking about quantum mechanics. And I'm going to be quite candid. I don't have a degree in physics, but I've been around here for a lot of decades, or a few decades, let's say. And many things I can follow now because I have schema. I built the foundation. I built the base to understand and then to tie it into everyday application. There are some things that he talks about that are way over my head, and he can keep talking and talking and talking about it. And my brain is full because I can't follow. I don't have the schema, meaning the frame, to follow what he's talking about when it comes to quantum mechanics and dimensions and things of that sort. Now, have I experienced those things with him? Yes, I have. But if you ask me to explain the actual physics behind it, I'm going to be at a loss for words. But he said healing is about quantum mechanics and everything is science. And we are all part of the quantum universal law. And this is all ruled by the cosmos. It's ruled by the whole because everything in the cosmos is part of the whole. Now think back to the metaphor that I used about the Porsche, okay? Going back to the factory was the example he used that night back in 2020. When we go to the whole, we're going quantum, so to speak. We're going to the whole. We are going to divine mind. I don't know how long you've been listening, but if you've been listening for any amount of time, you may have heard me talk about the Kabbalion, K-Y-B-A-L-I-O-N. The Kabbalion, even though it was published in the early 1900s, that manuscript is believed to be over 10,000 years old, and it believes the original writer/architect of that manuscript was Hermes Trismegistus, a Hermetic. And the first universal law of the 7 cosmic laws, and it took me a long time to get my mind around this, no pun, but the first universal law is that everything is mind. The universe is mind. The universe is mental. But guess what? Source. Again, call it whatever you want. Quantum field, quantum dimension, God, Buddha, Muhammad, whatever you want is also mind. Everything is mind. So he said, when we're talking to the body and we're trying to program the mind, the example that he was using that night is that many people, if they're just talking to the body, but they have all this fear going on and all this worry going on and all these kind of things. There was a wine glass right in front of him at dinner, and he said it's no different. He took his finger and thumped it and goes, it's no different than talking to an empty glass. There's nothing in it. There's no connection to source, so to speak, in the metaphor that I'm using. So he said, we have to identify with and connect with source. And when we connect with source, we then direct source to heal. And when we're connected from divine mind, when we're connected in an energetic way, not a fearful, emotional way, But basically, this is getting out of our own way and connecting with, again, whatever you call it, God, divine mind. That's when the body starts responding. And he went somewhere in that episode. I put it down because I was about to shoot the episode. And I know this is plastic, but it's the kind that doesn't leach, etc. And I normally drink out of glass, but I broke it, so I need to get a new one. But this is 40 ounces of water, and I drink several of these per day. And he taught me this years ago. And I start my day with water every single morning with 40 ounces of water. And he's told me this for years and years and years, and all of us that work with him. He said, water is holy. Water has memory. Of course, water has molecular structure, but water also has memory. And then he said, a direct quote is, water is energetically holy water. And I've mentioned this in other episodes, a couple of hundred episodes ago. When I fill up my water container with water, what I will do is I will bless the water before I drink it. Meaning, in the example that he gave that night at dinner, and he's given many times before when I've heard him talk about this, many people think they've got to go like, oh, namaste, and om, and all this. And he goes, no, it's not about that. It's simply the mental connection. And he goes, you do that with the thinking brain, meaning you think it. And it only because the water will resonate because everything's frequency, everything's molecular, everything's energy. So he goes, when you take a second and you bless your water, saying thing, and however you choose and whatever feels right for you. But when you do this, you say things like, you can say as simple as, thank you for nourishing me, or thank you for healing me. There was a Japanese scientist, probably, 15, 20 years ago. His last name is Emoto, I believe. And he had the science of putting rice in water and then in glass containers, and then talking to one really negatively and mean, and then talking to one about love. And then he would show these containers months later, how the negative talk affected the rice, which was in water. The negative talk affected it in a very negative way. So Don Javier, what he went into is, and again, this may be repetitive if you've listened for any amount of time. And by the way, if you're new to the podcast, go all the way back to the beginning. We tend to think that, oh, those are old episodes. They're just as relevant today as they were the day that I recorded them, because many things that I talk about are ancient wisdom and it's been around for thousands of years. So just because the episode might be 2, 3, 4 years old doesn't mean you won't find value in there. And a little tip, let's say you're new, and let's say you're not new to the podcast. What I do a lot of times is I listen to many of the conversations he's had with me over the years. And I probably have 100 gigs of conversation on my phone. And in the mornings, I'll listen to a conversation that he had with me and those that work with him. And I won't have any particular agenda. I'll just say, okay, I'll just scroll my phone and I'll just hit one. And I find 9 times out of 10, that's the message that I needed for today. So what I'm telling you is just scroll the episode. Just, if you're on your phone, just scroll them and just hit one of the older episodes and start listening. But he said, when you bless your water becomes an elixir of medicine. Think about that. When you bless your water, which means you're being grateful. And I'm not going to mention a whole lot about gratitude in this episode, but I was going to actually call this gratitude and healing, and I'll probably continue that on another episode. But gratitude is a frequency. Many of you know that. Gratitude is a feeling, and actually gratitude goes from thought to feeling to vibration to frequency. So we go from thought to feeling to vibration to frequency. So when you're in gratitude, that is a frequency. And when you have water and you can just hold it in your hand for literally 15 seconds and you bless the water, and it doesn't mean, again, you've got to go, oh, namaste. And no, simply having gratitude for the water and thanking the water. You're literally infusing it with the frequency of gratitude, and that is healing. Question, be honest. Do you really show gratitude for the water that in a couple of days without it, you would be a dead bag of skin? Do you show the gratitude? Do you have the gratitude for the water? And I do. And for many years ago, what I did, I've mentioned this in other episodes, is I put stickies up on all the bathrooms and all the faucets in the house. And all it said was that the stickies said, thank you, thank you, thank you. To remind me, because we operate by habit, if you've listened for any amount of time. So it reminded me to stop for a second and say thank you to the water as I was filling up my water bottle. Why? Because I wanted to bless the water and I wanted to thank the water for life force, for keeping me alive. Now, going there on life force, I mentioned this before. He said, it's interesting. I'm going to grab my water bottle again because I put it down. But he said it's interesting, or my comment is, let me go here for a moment. My comment is, it's interesting that water is holy and we collectively as a species abuse the water. Now, what I want to point out here is, notice this. Humanity collectively abuses water, yet the physical body is over 70% water. Think about that. We abuse water as a species collectively, but yet we are water. And without water, we would be dead. So to finish this little topic up, what we want to do is when you fill your water bottle, if you're healing, use the water to assist in your healing. Meaning, what I do is if I'm working on some kind of healing, it can be everything from a cold or whatever, an ache, a pain, whatever it is. What I will do is simply that day or that week or that month, I will simply say, thank you, water, for helping me heal or from healing or for healing me from and of blank. Now, something he said is we have to connect with water, like I'm talking about, in whatever way you want to do it for you. But a simple thank you with heartfelt gratitude is enough. 10, 15 seconds. But he said, when we connect consciously with the water will then connect with you and your physical body. And he says, when you connect with it, you activate it. So think about, what is your intention? What do you want to, air quote, activate your water with? Where do you want to direct instead of talking to the organ? Meaning we talked about healing a few minutes ago and healing the physical organs, which is what this person was talking about. What Don Javier was saying, talk to the water and the water will heal the organ. And the reason why is because we all have that power. We are all born creators. So he went on to say is when we connect with, we connect with the whole of ourselves, that's connecting with the cosmos. And the cosmos is everything. And then he segued here a bit and he talked more about frequency. And that's probably the most used word when I'm around him is the F word, frequency. And he's talked often about 528, healing frequency. And he told me a long time ago, after I had the heart challenges, etc., is that 528 is a pure healing frequency. And 528 is also known as the miracle tone. Some people even call it the love frequency. Now, how do we experience 528 for healing in all areas of our life? The way we do it is experiencing and air quote being in unconditional love. Not love, but unconditional love. Don Javier is often, he's not, this day and age in the field that I work in, personal development, and especially when you start talking about spirituality, the quackery is rampant. And Don Javier, literally, I'm going to use the word again, it's a universal qualifier, when I'm going to say he always backs things up with science. But what I want to point out, he's never like, oh, go buy this and go buy that and go get this and go download that and go buy this thing and that thing. He's not that way. But about 2.5 to 3 years ago, I was over at his house for dinner, my partner and I, and he walked in the kitchen and he handed me this right here. And it creates frequency, as I will show you. And by the way, there will be a link for this if you want in the show notes, okay? But it creates frequency, and this is pretty much is called a mindfulness tool, okay? But it's 528 frequency. And when you play this tool, and it only has one tone, 528, when you play the frequency, because everything is frequency, your body experiences, your cells respond to the frequency. So he says your cells will resonate with the frequency. So I want to basically, I want you guys to hear what this frequency is, okay? Because healing is frequency and well-being is frequency. Frequency is the cosmos and the cosmos is all. So this is 528. But the question is, because I could feel it when he played it for me the first time and when he gave me this, can you feel it? Because if you can feel it, you are feeling the frequency. So the purpose of this little apparatus, this little tuner, is to basically, you can play it a couple of times a day, 2 or 3 times a day. He'd even mentioned that even your animals, one of my dogs barks when I do it, but because it's even healing to people around us or animals, because 528 is a healing frequency. Get it? Don't get it? Entirely up to you. I don't have a dog in this fight. I mean, I'm just telling you what he told me. So I want to talk more about frequency with you guys, and we're going to do some more episodes on this. I want to keep each episode to about 30 minutes. But your transformational takeaway right now is, as I've said many times, we go from thought to feeling to vibration to frequency. Everything is frequency, and we heal through frequency. Source is frequency, like the Porsche, the manufacturer. We have to go to source to heal, not to the externals. The external would be popping a pill or different things. I'm not saying, because I've used those things before, I'm not saying at all. Actually, I'm saying the opposite. If you need trauma care, get your butt to the hospital. If you've got something wrong, you're having chest pains, you don't want to be blowing on this, you want to be getting your butt to the hospital. However, the mistake a lot of us make is that we actually will go to Western medical care and then we depend on it for the rest of our healing process, and we become dependent on the Western process. Now, many times when we go the Western way, they will put a medication in us. And the problem with the medication is that your body will stop making let's just say the chemical mixture of what it needs, because that chemical, the external chemical, is taken over from your body, and your body no longer produces what it needs to produce for you to heal. So whatever healing you need, whether it's a broken arm, whether you just got out of the hospital with a heart attack, whether you just had a stroke, whether you have cancer. And by the way, many people think they are cancer. People will say things like, I have cancer. Well, you're experiencing cancer. Many people will say things like, I am depressed. You're not depressed. Just like you're not with green tea, you're not my coffee mug. We simply are experiencing these things, and where we want to go, your transformational takeaway, and we'll pick up and continue talking in the next episode, we want to go to source, to heal first and foremost. We go to the externals if we need, but we use the externals as a supplement when needed, not the primary path to heal, because all healing, I don't care what doctor you go to, All healing comes from the inside out. And a little proof on that, depression. How many people have you seen that say, you know what, I'm depressed? And they go to the doctor and the doctor prescribes a pill and they're still depressed. And then they'll try multiple different pills and they're still depressed. By the way, in my experience, because I had clinical depression out of college, coupled with panic attacks, that's your soul talking to you, and you need to listen to your soul. Okay, that wraps up this episode. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you over on another episode. Bye-bye.